Alice had always been drawn to the forbidden, to the places and stories that others whispered about but never fully dared to explore. As a photographer with an eye for the eerie and unexplained, she sought out the darker side of the world, the abandoned places, the ghost stories, and the folklore that was dismissed by the rational but seemed to thrum with a pulse of something more. It was in her blood, this desire to uncover the hidden truths, the things that lurked in the shadows. So, when Alice heard the tale of Ravencroft, a village steeped in rumors of an ancient vampire queen, she couldn't resist. Ravencroft was not a place found on maps, and the stories about it were as fragmented as they were terrifying. It was said to be the haunt of a forgotten monarch, a bloodthirsty queen who had ruled over the dead for centuries, her name lost to history but her power ever present. Legend spoke of her kingdom, a place hidden in the woods where time stood still, and where the living were said to be either dead or cursed, unable to leave. The town had faded into obscurity, but the whispers still reached Alice's ears, through dusty libraries, old booksellers, and forgotten forums on the internet. Something about it called to her, something primal. By the time Alice arrived, it was autumn. The air was thick with mist, the trees surrounding the town twisted and skeletal in the waning light. Ravencroft seemed like a place untouched by time. The buildings, gray and dilapidated, leaned precariously as if unsure of their own existence. The streets were empty, save for the occasional stray animal, and the wind carried with it a palpable sense of abandonment. Yet something about it drew her in, curiosity, perhaps, or the pull of whatever dark force had claimed this place for itself. Alice checked into the town's only inn, a decrepit structure that creaked with every step she took. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, and the air inside was musty, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. The proprietor, a gaunt, elderly woman with a face as pale as chalk, greeted her with a nervous smile. "Welcome to Ravencroft," she said, her voice shaky. Her eyes were wide, constantly darting to the shadows as though she feared something was lurking just out of sight. "I've heard. You've come to photograph our town." Alice nodded, suppressing a shiver at the woman's unsettling demeanor. "I'm here to document the history of the place. The stories, the old buildings. I've heard it's a town full of mysteries." The woman's smile faltered for a moment, and her eyes seemed to darken. "Not all mysteries are meant to be uncovered, dear. Some things should be left in the past." She hesitated, then added in a near whisper, "You should leave while you still can. It's not safe for strangers here." Alice was taken aback by the warning, but dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman. Ravencroft's mysteries were exactly what she had come for, after all. She had come to explore, to capture the haunting beauty of a town forgotten by time. That night, as Alice lay in her bed, she began to feel it, an unease, a weight in the air. The room was cold, and despite the blanket wrapped tightly around her, she couldn't shake the chill. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong, that she wasn't alone. She sat up, heart pounding, eyes scanning the darkness. The stillness of the night was oppressive, broken only by the distant rustling of the wind and the faint sound of something else. A scratching noise from the walls. No, from the floorboards. Something moving beneath her, her breath caught in her throat. Was it the wind, or something far worse? She decided it was just nerves, her imagination getting the best of her in this strange town. But she couldn't dismiss the feeling that something was watching her. Even though the room was empty, even though the inn was silent, she felt its gaze upon her. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried to ignore it, but sleep wouldn't come. As the days wore on, the sense of being watched grew stronger. In the mornings, when she went out to explore, the air was thick with silence. The streets of Ravencroft were eerily deserted, and the once vibrant town was now nothing more than a ghost of its former self. The buildings stood like decayed monuments, their windows dark and vacant. Alice found herself drawn to them, photographing the abandoned houses, the crumbling churches, and the overgrown alleys that seemed to hold secrets too deep to uncover. The people of Ravencroft were as unsettling as the town itself. They never seemed to make eye contact, always avoiding her gaze, their faces hollow, as though they were shadows of the people they once were. Alice could feel their eyes on her, following her every move, but whenever she tried to speak to them, they would offer only fleeting responses, their words heavy with unspoken fear. By the third day, Alice began to question whether she had made a mistake in coming here. She had yet to find anything concrete about the Vampire Queen, yet the rumors persisted. Whispers echoed through the streets, stories of a monarch who ruled with terror, her reign a dark age from which the people of Ravencroft had never truly emerged. They spoke of the Queen's immortality, her thirst for blood, and the curse that had been laid upon the land. At the town's inn, Alice met Mira, an old woman who lived in the shadows of the town's history. Mira was hunched, her long white hair tangled around her face, but there was something about her that drew Alice in. The woman's eyes were dark, as though they had seen too much, and her voice had the tremor of someone who had lived through a nightmare they could never escape. "Please, child, leave," Mira begged, her voice raw with desperation. "This town is cursed. It has been for centuries. The Queen, the Vampire Queen, rules here still. Her power is eternal. She watches over all of us." Alice was taken aback by Myra's intensity. She had heard the stories, but hearing them from someone so frightened made her wonder if there was more truth to them than she had believed. "The Queen, what does she want?" Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Myra's gaze flickered nervously around the room. "She wants you," she said, her voice trembling. "She's been watching you since you arrived. You're not like the others. She can feel your blood. She will come for you. And when she does, you will never leave." The words struck Alice like a cold wave, the blood draining from her face. She tried to laugh it off, to brush it aside as the ramblings of an old woman, but something in Myra's eyes told her this wasn't a warning to be taken lightly. That night, Alice felt the presence again. It was unmistakable now, an overwhelming sense of being watched, of something otherworldly closing in on her. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, stretching and twisting in ways they shouldn't. Her heart raced, her pulse thudding in her ears. She could hear something. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, moving through the halls of the inn. She sprang from the bed, heart in her throat, and crept to the window. The town below was shrouded in mist, and the distant howls of wolves echoed in the night. In the distance, she saw a figure standing in the center of the town square. A woman, tall and elegant, her skin as pale as moonlight, her hair long and dark. Alice's breath caught in her throat as the woman turned her head, her eyes glowing crimson in the darkness. She was impossibly beautiful, but there was a hunger in her gaze, a predatory gleam that made Alice's blood run cold. Before Alice could react, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving only an emptiness that gnawed at her soul. The Vampire Queen had found her. The story has only just begun. The dark forces of Ravencroft are coming for Alice, and as the days unfold, the secrets of the town and the Vampire Queen will slowly unravel, pulling Alice into a nightmare she never imagined she'd have to survive. It had only been a few days since Alice had arrived in Ravencroft, yet the town seemed to grow stranger by the hour. The air felt heavier, the days colder, and the shadows longer, as if time itself was losing its grip here. What had begun as an investigation into old legends and forgotten stories had become something far more unsettling. The town, so isolated and silent, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy that Alice could not ignore. At night, sleep was a battle. Her dreams were vivid and unsettling, always the same. A woman with pale skin, like marble, her crimson eyes gleaming like twin pools of blood, and sharp, predatory fangs. The woman stood tall, regal, and in her presence, Alice felt both a strange allure and a cold terror. She called to Alice in her dreams, her voice silky and smooth, a promise of something dark, something infinite. The first night it happened, Alice woke with a start, her heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The dreams were haunting, but she pushed them aside, dismissing them as the result of too much time spent studying the town's dark history. She had read all the books about vampires, about ancient rulers, and blood-soaked thrones. Perhaps it was the endless hours of research in that dimly lit room that had begun to blur the line between fiction and reality. But as the days wore on, the dreams did not fade. They became more intense, more real. The queen, this vampire queen, seemed to haunt her waking hours as well. Alice could feel her presence even when she was wide awake, a chill creeping down her spine at the faintest sound, the faintest whisper. It was as if the queen's essence had begun to seep into every corner of her mind. It was on the fourth evening of her stay that Alice decided to confront her fears. She needed to get out of the inn. The feeling of being trapped, of being watched, was unbearable. The walls of Ravencroft seemed to close in on her, suffocating her curiosity and feeding her paranoia. She grabbed her camera and ventured into the woods surrounding the town, hoping the isolation would offer some peace and perhaps some clarity.